When I was working on some sketches one night around New Year's time, I realized I had no idea how to draw a turtle. I know what turtles look like in general, but I couldn't actively draw one without needing to look directly at the photo. I decided it was time to change this. I spent all of January just drawing turtles. I wanted to be able to draw a turtle on demand whenever an illustration called for one. But what happens when an artist draws only turtles for 30 days straight? The results? Well, they weren't what I expected at all. Why did I decide on turtles? Well, turtles are part of what I like to call illustrator gold. Turtles are a very unique animal. We're all familiar with them as nothing else looks like them in the animal kingdom, outside of tortoises, of course. They're such a striking shape, and many cultures identify with that shape and ascribe meaning to it. Many people in the world feel a kinship to turtles. It's a symbol that has a lot of meaning behind it. These kinds of symbols are gold for illustrators because you get the entire culture behind the subject when you use it in a painting. And you get all of that for free. You don't need to explain to your audience about the complicated history and meaning or the dynamics of it. They understand it going into the illustration, which allows you to explore more interesting interpretations of the subject and still have it read well to the audience. After all, illustration is just visual storytelling at its core. I had a simple set of goals for the month that I used to keep me on track. Number 1, learn the anatomy of turtles actively so I didn't need to use references to draw them in my illustrations. Number 2, learn how turtles acted in nature so I could place them in illustrations in believable ways. And number 3, create a finished painting by the end of the month that I could turn into a cross-stitch design. Wait, cross-stitch design? Well, haven't you heard? I make cross-stitch patterns out of my art. If you'd like to learn more, see the link in the description where I go into it in more detail. I also have a link to my Etsy shop if you'd like to help support me and what I do on this channel. I first started by doing studies of turtles to try to understand their anatomy. I made a Pinterest board of photos and sketches that I liked of turtles. I mixed photos from different angles and different species of turtles that showed off different aspects of turtle anatomy and behavior. I also pinned drawings by other artists that I thought had a unique take on how turtles can be conveyed visually. It served as my idea board and my anatomy reference for this month. You can find it in the video description. Every week or so in the month, I drew a completed turtle drawing to see where I was with my understanding. You can see the first turtle I drew on the screen. It kind of looks like a turtle in some ways, but it really seems to be more of some tortoise dinosaur hybrid. Clearly I had some work to do. I did more anatomy studies to figure out how to get these turtles to look right. I read up on how their shells grow, what their shell is made out of, hint, it's the rib cage, and what the little dark spots that cover the legs, feet, and face are. I eventually landed on my second turtle drawing, summing up all the details I learned from this. You can find a link to the webpage where I learned about the turtle anatomy in the video description down below. At this point, I wanted to get started on putting some colors down on a page to learn about how to paint turtles, not just draw them. Paintings transfer over to cross-stitch designs much better than drawings. This is my first attempt at getting the colors and tones right when drawing turtles. You're going to notice something interesting at the end here, and it is my first surprising takeaway from this challenge. When painting with digital mediums, you really need to push the colors and values. Most of this painting was far too drab and lifeless until I punched it up at the end. I don't want to have to do such drastic course corrections on my paintings. Why did I have to do it here? Well, here's what I think. When painting traditionally, you are usually mixing highly saturated colors together and pulling them towards the chromatic grays, which is the middle of the color wheel. I'm used to mixing colors traditionally. It's one of my favorite parts about traditional painting, and it just makes sense to my brain. I learned color theory with how it relates to traditional paints, so I kept that mindset for my digital paintings. Sure, you can mix colors, but you don't need to start from highly saturated tones. You can start from anywhere on the color wheel, and you don't even need to mix anything. Because I knew I wanted to mix towards a chromatic gray, I would just skip the mixing and go straight to it. I started at my destination, and because of that, I missed out on bringing those brighter, saturated tones into the painting. I needed to change how I approached color when painting digitally. This is something that finally clicked because I was forced to paint this brightly colored subject matter I otherwise would have never got into. So thank you, turtles. At this point, I went for one more round of drawing turtles on my turtle drawing sheet. At this time, you can see I finally figured out how to get the details right on the shell of the turtle. At a glance, it actually looks like a real turtle, not some turtle, tortoise, dinosaur hybrid. I was finally on the right track. I have a difficult time putting in details, and this was no exception. I decided at this point I really needed to work on getting a drawing and painting that was really detail heavy to try to get better at this. Turtle shells have a lot of interesting bits to them, so I started thumbnailing some designs that I could use to draw a lot of details. I went a few rounds and did some quick color mock-ups of some of the ones I liked. I felt that they didn't let me really get to the details of the turtle though. So I decided, let's just focus in on the turtle shell and give it some interesting twist. I put in one of the other objects I worked out how to draw, which are skulls. I've spent a lot of time learning to draw skulls, so I could pretty easily throw them into whatever I'm drawing or painting. I really focused on the detail work with this painting. I wanted to capture different materials on the back of the turtle shell, like a gold inlay, a smooth painted shell, and some interesting 3D looking skull sculptures, or sculpture as I like to call it. I used the top-down lighting to simulate the light that would happen in the ocean itself. I then also added a little bit of secondary light sources from the turtle itself, like it was a glowing spirit guide into the underworld. Kind of a cool look. I later scrapped the idea, but I still kept the secondary light as it really helped model the form. My learnings from the How to Render book by Scott Robertson really helped me here. It's something that I've been working on most of the winter months here. I was able to get the form to read clearly. I think the skulls really pop out. Unfortunately, once the details were done, I kinda just didn't like how it looked. Now, don't get me wrong, the idea is rad as hell, but the finished result feels flat and uninspired, to say the least. I focused so much on the details, I forgot to put the turtle shell in a space on the canvas, and the composition was just incredibly basic. The only thing going for this piece is the back of the shell, and it just isn't enough to make someone go like, wow, I get it, that's really cool. I should buy this and give you money, Tam, so you can live your dream as an artist. Okay, maybe that last part is maybe not totally realistic, but it's where I want to get to someday. And this painting is just not getting me closer to that dream. This time I wasn't going to get bogged down in the details. I was going to start with a strong composition and then put the details into the painting from there, as opposed to the other way. I really struggled with finding a creative composition. I felt like I just couldn't come up with any designs that I liked. I learned another important lesson here. My weak point wasn't just drawing details, but was also my creativity. I haven't worked on my creativity much lately, as I've been diligently studying the fundamentals. So I'll need to focus on that and catch up to my new abilities as an artist. I eventually thumbnailed a design I liked enough. I ran with it and started what I hoped to be the painting that would achieve my last goal, to get something I could make into a cross-stitch design. I encountered some challenges when painting this piece, similar to ones I've had before. Trying to get the details to read in the composition of this piece was very difficult for me. I also didn't know how to paint a canoe at the bottom of the sea, let alone what all the rocks and plants should be littering the ground on the floor. I was encountering issues with how limited my visual library is, so I needed to figure out how to draw those things as well. I was able to research these topics, but I wasn't able to get the details to look as good as I hoped. Everything turned out very fuzzy, and in my attempts to add details did not really help at all. It was frustrating to get so close to something I felt was special. I felt the idea of this painting was really cool. I like the idea of spectral turtles with the Nordic rune of protection inlaid on their shells, helping to protect the soul of a fallen sailor. I just felt like it was a unique take on the turtle protector concept and pretty metal. Even the composition was much more dynamic than my last few paintings. It seemed like things were going well until I needed to just detail out the initial sketching phase. Well, I ended up finishing the painting, in quotes, but not really being satisfied with its quality enough to go through with creating a cross-stitch design from it. I may make some changes and rework some areas to make that happen at some point, but for now I think it's just time to move on. According to my goals, my 30 days of drawing turtles was technically a failure, but I'm gonna count it as a success. After 30 days, I have a few sketches that I can use for reference in the future if I ever need to draw a turtle. I can also draw and paint sea turtles basically on demand in whatever angle I need to for any future illustrations. And on top of that, I ended up with 2 paintings that were okay, but not the level I want to be at with my art. However, this result's definitely a step forward in my art career, especially compared to the turtle painting I submitted to competition at the end of last year. You can learn more about that by watching my 2002 art review video, linked above and in the video description. I was surprised by my takeaways during this challenge. I thought the hardest part would be drawing and painting the turtles, but this really wasn't the case in the slightest. I actually had a relatively easy time learning the form and the anatomy of the turtles. I found a lot of great resources to help me with this. Apparently a lot of people like turtles. The form and anatomy was the easiest part of the subject, not something I would have guessed. I thought that would be it for this challenge's conclusion, but it turns out I learned far more than I expected. I realized I can't just rely on the details. I need to make sure the details live in a composition that makes sense on the canvas. It needs to be composed in a way that gives the viewer something more interesting to look at than just pretty little bits and shiny things. When working digitally, I need to push color to avoid making my paintings a drab sea of chromatic grays. I love chromatic grays, but when traditional painting, that paint will constantly pull you towards saturation, helping you get a nice balance between grays and saturated tones. This isn't something digital does by default because you don't actually need to mix your colors. You can just pick them. So you need to take on the responsibility of pulling your colors towards saturation that traditional paints usually do for you. I also learned that my composition and creativity are my weak points. I had trouble coming up with the original ideas for my thumbnails, and I struggled with having turtles seem interesting on the page. I know it's not the turtles' fault. I've seen many great artworks using turtles as their subject matter. I think I just need to work at it more. And on the topic of working at things more, I need to learn how to paint details better. I struggled with this on the final painting, and I want to figure out how to get hard and soft edges to play together. I was stuck in a soft edge hell on my last painting, and it was really frustrating and upsetting, and I want to make sure I avoid frustration when creating my art. So I'm going to make it a priority to figure this out. I think for now I'll move on to working on the new areas I identified that are my weak points. I want to paint directly from photos for a little bit to really figure out how to depict details properly, so I can use that knowledge in my own illustrations. I also want to work on my creativity and get better at coming up with interesting ideas and compositions. Regardless of what I do, I will know this. Drawing turtles for 30 days taught me much more than just how to draw turtles. I would love to know if you watched this video all the way through to the end. I'm working on getting better with my video editing, so if you did, let me know you got here and what you liked or didn't like in the comments below. As always, I'll see you in the next video. Here's to some great art for all of us. Have a good one. Bye.